Hello, everyone. Welcome to another program here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. On behalf of our executive director, Tracy Hyder-Suffern, along with our artistic staff of Christian McBride and John Batiste, we are excited to have you joining us today for another episode of Desert Island Discs, an opportunity for us to talk with musicians about music that they would love to have with them if they're stuck on a desert island. And our host for Desert Island Discs is the journalist, writer, and historian, and now educator, Mr. Ted Pankin. Please welcome Ted Pankin and our guest for today, Mr. Johnathan Blake.
And let's have virtual applause for Maestro Blake, and as we would were we in the facility of the National Jazz Museum on 129th Street, just east of Lenox. But we're still following COVID procedures and doing these virtually. Our seventh season of Desert Island Discs. I've been curating it since 2015, and numerous guests have come up, including a number of drummers. Johnathan Blake is the latest one. He has a new album called Homeward Bound on Blue Note, his first for the label, and his fourth CD is a leader, all told. Very impressive recording with Immanuel Wilkins, Joel Ross, Dezron Douglas, and David Virelles on keyboards, covering a very broad spectrum of music in a very organic and creative manner. Welcome, Johnathan. We have quite a program set for us. Yeah. And it's not exactly maybe everything you'd want on the desert island if you had electricity and a CD player and internet, but it's kind of a mix of desert island and things that have influenced, or maybe it all is desert island, but we'll get to it. It's a very grooving program, a lot of and a lot of surprises contained therein.
Yeah.
Johnathan, you decided to open with something you're from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And your father, John Blake, a violinist, who many of our listeners may well have heard and be familiar with, was also part of that scene and participated in the first recording that you're going to play for us, the first album, and which is by Grover Washington. So tell us about the context of this date, Live at the Bijou, which is a big hit in the late 70s when it came out on Kudu, I think it was.
Yeah, it was on Kudu, and of course this is the soundtrack of my childhood in a way, So my dad first began as a conductor for a string orchestra for Grover, and Grover kind of took the orchestra on the road for a little bit, and then my dad was asked to join Grover's band as a featured soloist and composer. So this was probably like 75, and I was born in 76. So I at a very early age, my mom and I were traveling with my dad on the road with Grover. So again, this was kind of like the soundtrack of my childhood. So I was hearing these songs that are featured on Live at the Bijou very early on, and it kind of just remained with me. So the track that we have for you today, called Summer Song, is actually a composition that my dad composed for the band, and it actually features them on vocals, and my dad is also playing keyboards and some violin too. So, but this whole album, Live at the Bijou, became like a really big hit for Grover. And I remember my dad later on telling me stories about when they were on the road and they were just like looking at the charts, and the record would just keep climbing week after week. They would be in Sausalito or somewhere on the West Coast, and they were getting these reports. So this really became a big hit. And also when in the summer, sometimes Grover would do these big concerts in Philadelphia in an area called Penn's Landing. And, you would always hear the audience requesting these songs that were on this record. So, this is, for me, I wanted to start with this particular this particular song because it reverts me back to childhood every time every time I hear it, and it actually stays in the car with me when I'm driving around. So,
this is Desert Island.
This is definitely Desert Island for sure. Like I have to have this record if I want a Desert Island.
It's called Summer Song.
Summer Song.
Johnathan has given us about 14 selections. So to make everything, give us at least a taste of everything that he has presented, we're going to have to fade out at certain points so that we can also hear Johnathan talk about it. We actually cut down from 18 or 19, and that was a complicated process, but fun. It was so much fun to listen to everything. Tell us more about before we proceed with the music though, Johnathan, tell us more about your father as a musicianship, as a human being. He's a total musician. He was best known, of course, as a virtuosic violinist who was also a strong improviser.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, my father comes from a very musical background. My grandparents, my grandmother especially, she was an organist in the church, and all of my father's siblings, he had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they all play music. One of my aunts, she's actually a storyteller, and my grandfather was a storyteller, and also he wrote short stories coming up. So there was always music going on in the house, already some form of the arts going on in my grandparents' house. So my father actually started on piano, and actually began playing gigs, around piano after college. But while in college, or maybe no, I'm sorry, early on he started playing violin in the orchestra. But in college, he heard a recording of Stuff Smith, and said, "That's it. This is what I want to do." And so he started learning how to improvise on the violin. But at that same time, he was also composing music too. He was very heavily influenced by Herbie Hancock and Horace Silver. So a lot of his earlier compositions were heavily influenced by those two musicians. But he, when he went to West Virginia University, and when he graduated from school, he moved back to Philadelphia and started doing gigs on piano around the city. And he also got known as a composer and arranger. So he, in the early 70s, he started recording and composing music for and doing arrangements for like Kool and the Gang. He did arrangements for Grover, and that's kind of how he got put on. And so, like I said earlier, Grover kind of hired him as a conductor for this orchestra. And then I guess what happened was Grover would call him up on stage to kind of solo on one tune. And so maybe a few months later, Grover asked if he would join the band, and he joined the band playing keyboards and started soloing. And then he stayed with Grover for about 3.5, 4 years. And then right after that, he started playing with McCoy Tyner, and that came through another great musician from Philly named Charles Fambrough, who was already in McCoy's band. And Charles recommended my father because McCoy at that time was looking to expand I guess he had a quintet, so he was looking to expand it to a sextet. And I think he was going to call somebody like Jean Luponti to play violin in the band. And Charles said, "No, I got this dude from Philadelphia who I think you would really enjoy." So he kind of heard some stuff of my father's and called him for like a couple dates, I think in New York. And then at the time, my dad was still with Grover. And then Grover changed the band up, and he, after those hits with McCoy, he called McCoy and said, "Look, I'm no longer working with Grover. So if you're still thinking about using violin, I'm free." And my father used to always tell me that the conversation went like that. And then McCoy said, "You can stay in my band as long as you want." And so the next gig with McCoy was like a month-long trip in Japan. And they stayed for about, like I said, for a month. And that band was Charles, George Adams, Joe Ford on soprano and alto saxophone, my father, percussionist named Guillermo Franco, and the great Al Foster was playing drums.
Well, the track you've queued up for us is from a McCoy Tyner album called Horizon, mm-hmm. which is a larger ensemble group, but this is a trio track.
This is a trio.
It's a composition by Charles Fambrough, which I think you told me a story about. So before we play it, let's hear that story. It's called "One for Honor."
Yeah. So the story goes, like I said, Charles had been playing with McCoy for quite some time, and so McCoy, like Grover, always encouraged the other members of the band to write music for the group. So Charles took it upon himself to say, "Well, I'm going to challenge McCoy. I'm going to write this tune, like descending thirds and going down in major steps, because he's used to just playing like modal and kind of four stuff. I don't think he could handle this." I don't know why he thought that, but so apparently,
young and foolish.
Yeah, young and dumb. So apparently, what happened was, and the only reason I know this is because my father told me the story. So he said they get to the studio. He has this tune, and he says McCoy kind of like looks it over. He says, "Okay, let's try it." And I guess Orrin Kepnews was the producer of this particular record, Horizon, and they said McCoy looked at it and played it perfectly the first time, and Charles is playing, but he's kind of like looking with his mouth open, like, I cannot believe this is happening. Like, this dude is playing the song like he wrote it, and so my dad always kind of used to joke with Charles. He's like, I don't know why you would ever think to try to challenge McCoy. He's a master of this music. He's a master of his instrument, and but it's like you said, he was just young and foolish. But so the result of this track that we're going to play, I think this is either the first or second take, but it was kind of just like this magical take, and Charles was left with his mouth open, like, I can't believe this is happening.
So there's something to visualize as you listen to One for Honor, McCoy Tyner, Charles Fambrough, and Al Foster.
Al Foster.
On drums. first or second take of One for Honor. Yeah, and McCoy Tyner, as Johnathan Blake mentioned, had just seen that at the time that in the studio and nailed that. Charles Fambro's astonishment at what McCoy was doing didn't stop him from slamming lines throughout it and linking up like a complete champ with Al Foster. A few words about Al Foster. I want to take advantage of having you around for some pithy comments on some of the drum masters we're going to.
Oh, of course. Well, Al has been, it's like an uncle to me, he's like extended family. I've known him since I was 3 years old. And he's been a very integral part in my maturity and my growth as not just a drummer, but also just a man and a human being. I've gone to him for advice over the years. We've talked on the phone several times. He's showed up at gigs that I was playing on, and of course made me very nervous. But he's been nothing but very supportive and very helpful in my growth. Especially for knowing me so young. So it was always, I guess, funny to him or amazing to him to like see me on tour. I remember this one particular story that I tell friends of mine was I was on tour in Germany with Tom Harrell and his quintet, and we were playing opposite of this kind of all-star group with that Al was playing in. And if you know Al, he has a very distinct setup, and if you know me, I have a very distinct setup. So Al sets his cymbals up very, very high and kind of tilted towards him. And I set my cymbals very low and kind of pointing outward. So I get to the venue for sound check, and of course, there's only one drum set, and only one set of cymbal stands. So I get there, and of course, Al has his set up perfectly, and I hate to even disturb him, and so I go downstairs immediately to the green room where he is, and I say, "Hey, Uncle, I have to ask you a favor." I said, "I have a very different setup than you. Is it possible that I can change the height and everything so that I can set my cymbals up?" And he looks at me. He's like, "You're really lucky you're my nephew, because if it was somebody else, I would say no." So he followed me back upstairs, and he kind of took down everything. And if you know Al, it takes him quite a long time to get his setup perfectly. And I'm kind of the same way. So it's like, we're very rigid when it comes to like changing up the setup. So I was so happy that we had that relationship of like, nephew and uncle, and he was kind enough to let me do that. But he's just been, beautiful on and off the bandstand. I remember one time he came to Birdland, I was playing, and he started asking me questions about my setup. I think he was having some arm trouble or some wrist problems, and he was thinking about maybe trying to change his setup a bit. And I just told him the reason why I set up the way I do, and we had this long conversation about it. So and he understood, and I don't know if he actually went through with changing his setup. I don't think so, because I saw something recently of him, and it was kind of the same Al. But yeah, I can't say enough about him. He's one of my favorite musicians. He's a great composer, but also I love the way he kind of paints the time, so to speak. To me, he's just like an artist, or painter when he's playing. So I just love watching him play, and I just love hearing him on records. That particular track of McCoy, it's just, when you really listen to it, like, it's just amazing how he gets inside these rhythms, and it's just like right there with McCoy. It's like, for me, it's like the perfect example of rhythm section playing. So he doesn't overplay. He never has overplayed. He always plays what's necessary. And it always fits the situation. So.
Well, thank you for that, Johnathan Blake. Well, we're going to hear two pieces back to back that reflect some of the greatest American, I'm going to use the word popular music just because I can't think of something else, from 50 years ago. One by Stevie Wonder, who plays drums on this track, as well as singing and playing moog bass and other things. And the next by The Meters, featuring Zigaboo Moralista. Few words about Golden Lady from Stevie Wonder's album Inner Vision before we play some more music.
Well, sure. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and my parents were big fans of Motown, so they they knew the records with Little Stevie Wonder, and in the 70s, like this record, especially Inner Visions, this was a huge hit for Stevie Wonder, coming off of I think Music in My Mind or something like that, where it had Superstition. But all these tunes on this record, Living for the City, what's the other one on there? Oh man, I'm spacing out on the name. But all these tunes became big hits. And my dad, I was mentioning earlier, he would play. He got, when he came back from school, from college, when he moved back to Philadelphia, he was getting hired to play keyboard and play in these clubs. And these were the songs that were being requested because these songs were so popular at that time. So he had to learn a lot of these tunes. So, growing up, these tunes were being played throughout my house. My dad had this amazing stereo system. He had a studio built in his basement. And he had the stereo system with speakers down in the basement, but also speakers upstairs. So if he was learning or checking out music, he could play it throughout the whole house. And
wow, very immersive.
Yeah. So we grew up with, especially myself. I have two younger siblings, and but I just remember vividly, like hearing these songs throughout the house. So this one especially kind of just stayed with me because, of course, I just love his singing, but also just the fact that he's playing drums on it and just playing the perfect pocket. It's not about chops. It's not about like playing everything he knows. It's just really about playing the groove. And then what he's singing over top of that, at the end of this piece, especially like these modulations at the end, he's just nailing it. And it's just like, it's just this whole like unveiling of this beautiful picture or something like that. So this is definitely another one of my desert islands. I have to have this record and I definitely have to listen to this tune on repeat. So
Golden Lady, Stevie Wonder.
Go there. chance just to hold your hand. A touch of rain and sunshine made the flower grow into a lovely smile that's blooming. And it's so clear to me that here's no dream come true. There's no way that I'll be losing. And golden lady, I'd like to go there. Golden lady, I'd like to go there. Take me right away. Sunshine made the flower grow into a lovely smile that's blooming. And it's so clear to me that you're my dream come true. There's no way that I'll be losing. And golden lady, I'd like to go there. Go
he struck by the meters. A few words about Zigaboo Moralista, Johnathan.
Oh man, he's a hero of mine. I feel like I didn't get to hip to him till later on, but once I heard him with the meters, I said, man, this is kind of life changing. Like just his overall feel. It comes from the New Orleans second line. I remember I heard him once live, but also prior to hearing him, the great Idris Muhammad live. And they all have this way of the attack on the snare and just how they groove is just so unique. So I really started, diving in, head first and the New Orleans second line and trying to copy what I heard, because I just love that overall feeling, that that laid back feeling. You feel like you have a cushion that you're laying on or a mattress, and you don't feel like getting up because it's so comfortable. And Zigaboo, Ziggy, what I love about it is he can play any style, but it always has that relaxed feel to it. And I love that, whether he's playing straight ahead, whether he's playing straight funk. It always has that really down home good feeling. So he's definitely one of my favorites. And I really loved his work on those, especially those first 3 meter records. The self-titled 1 meters, Look a Pie Pie, and then the last one is called Strutting. And I really love those 3 in particular, because they're mainly, all of them are, for the most part, maybe Strutting has some vocals, but mainly they're all instrumental. So it just really for me, when I was delving into this, it was so great to just hear them play those grooves, and when you listen to it, it's like, again, it's not about chops. It's really just about laying in that groove and feeling comfortable and okay with just staying there in a pocket. So I love the fact that he can do that and still remain very creative.
So how old were you when you started playing the drums? Have you been sort of beating rhythms forever? When did you start actually studying the instrument? Okay,
so studying the instrument, studying drums, I started when I was 10 years old. I started out on violin at 3 years old. And so I was playing in the orchestras at my elementary school. And it was I think it was about 5th grade when my school decided that they wanted to have a larger music program. So instead of just having orchestra, they wanted to have a concert band. They kind of wanted to have a stage band, which they call, that was the name that they called for jazz band. So I began taking lessons in elementary school at age 10. They had like a proficiency test that I had to take, and if you scored well, you could choose the instrument. And but I like to say I was into drums and playing before that. My parents used to always tell me that I would pull out the pots underneath in the cupboard underneath the sink, and I would kind of surround myself with them and take my mom's wooden spoons, and whatever was playing on the radio or my father's stereo, I would listen and then try to copy what I heard and beat the rhythms out that I was hearing. And so I like to say, even before I started formally lessons, I was already really into the drums. But it just took a while for especially my mom, to get used to wanting to hear drums 24/7.
I've heard that story before from drummers. That dynamic. Were you always interested in the drums as sort of a collection of different tones and textures? Yeah.
I really like the fact that most of the drummers that I were listening to, they weren't really just into the rhythmic aspect about the drums. It was also the tones that they were getting out of their instrument. So when I, especially as I got a little older, really tuning into the way, Philly Joe Jones tuned his drums, the way Elvin tuned their drums, the way Tony, the way Art Blakey. It was so unique to their individual sound. And that was something that I was really attracted to, because I said, man, this is, these musicians are so great, but they also have a very unique sound and a very unique tone that they get out of the instrument. And people like Art Blakey and Elvin and Philly, especially Philly and Art, they were great pianists. They could play piano. So they approached the instrument not just as a rhythmic instrument. They kind of approached it more with a melodic sense too. When you see videos of Blakey, he's changing the pitch by of the drums. He's changing the pitch of the drums by dampening it with his elbow or with his hand. Sometimes he's taking mallet solos. Philly was the same way. So fairly early on, I was really attracted to the tones that were coming out of the drums. And, of course we learned by imitation. So I was trying to mimic anything that I heard, and trying to tune it or try to get the exact pitch. And it was only later on where I figured, oh, okay, this is kind of what makes these artists unique, and what makes them know, you can know who it is before anybody even says anything. Like if you hear Art Blakey, right away it's Art Blakey. If you hear Tony, it's Tony. If you hear even more modern day, like when I hear, if I'm listening, I can tell when it's Brian Blade. I can tell when it's Jeff Watts. I can tell when it's Greg Hutchinson. I can tell when it's Clarence Penn, Bill Stewart, Antonio Sanchez. The list goes on.
I think a lot of people can tell Johnathan Blake too, actually.
I feel like, to me, I'm a collection of what I grew up listening to. So and even more the modern day, or like not necessarily quote unquote jazz drummers, but even like hearing Idris Muhammad, who of course plays straight ahead, but you could hear him play a groove and you knew right away from the way he attacks the snare and the tone that he got out of his drums. I would know right away, oh, that's Idris, or that's Ziggy, or that, even more modern day, that's Dennis Chambers, so it just, for me, it just gave, maybe not knowing when I was young, but like really being in tune with the tones that these artists were getting, it later on, it really helped my ears to identify who these people were.
Now, as a kid in Philly coming up, and I imagine starting to go out more and hear music, you had some pretty good drummers locally to listen to, like Byron Landon and Bobby Durham and Edgar Bateman, and the drummer we're going to hear on the next track, Mickey Roker, very distinctive sound himself.
Oh, totally.
And the track we're going to hear is a trio of Philadelphians who went up I-95, I guess, for a gig at Birdland in its previous location on 106th and Broadway, and did a recording for a label called Candid, which I guess is still around. So Shirley Scott and Arthur Harper and Mickey Roker, all stalwarts of the Philadelphia scene, and all with extremely impressive resumes in their own right. A few words about the piece we're about to hear.
Oh, well, I used to hear them play this live at a great club called Ortlieb's Jazz House. And Mickey Roker was another, extended family member. And I remember sometimes, like, when I would come down to see him just to hear, if he didn't feel like playing the second set, or the third set, I should say, he would always say, "Oh, little Blake, get up there." Like I was never Johnathan. I was always little Blake. I was like, "Little Blake, get up there and play." And I would play the third set, So it was either playing with Arthur Harper and Shirley Scott, or playing with Trudy Pitts and Bootsy Barnes, who was another Philadelphian legend. So just really being able to have these amazing artists who were living in locally in my area, to be able to see them any night of the week was just a really amazing experience. Mickey really took a liking to me, and he kind of took me under his wing. So I was, sometimes I would be, carrying his drums in or helping him pack up. It was just like, it was kind of like, the teacher and the pupil type of vibe. But, as time progressed, it became more like family. So I just loved being in that environment, and especially during that time, because like you mentioned, there was a lot of great drummers. Leon Jordan was another one. You mentioned Barron. Ralph Peterson was there around that time. But always being a little earlier on, Bobby Dorn was still there before he moved to Europe. So just being surrounded by people like Edgar and Bobby and Mickey, and then taking the time to nurture a young aspiring drummer was, when I look back at it, it was just like, you can't put a price on these memories and these situations. So this piece that we're about to hear, I used to kind of just wait for them to play this one, because it was, we talked about earlier about that feeling of Ziggy, how he lays back. The way they play the melody is so laid back. You're just like, oh man, are they going to make it to beat one? And I used to just like crave, to hear them play this. So I can't wait to hear this blues that we're going to play.
It's called Blues. Well, it's called Blues Everywhere.
Blues Everywhere.
A little taste of the feel that Johnathan Blake was talking about from the trio of Shirley Scott, Arthur Harper, and Mickey Roker. And I guess you played that tune on a number of occasions on those third sets you were describing.
Yeah, we used to play that. And I also remember, like, if Mickey if he didn't like something that I played, he would kind of yell from across the room, "Don't do that, little Blake! Don't do that." So,
all with love, I'm sure.
All with love. It was just, it was great. It was a great mentoring experience. And
but what you're bringing up, there's a sort of larger point to it, that at 15 and 16, I guess you're about that age when you're doing this.
Maybe even a little younger, maybe 14. Yeah, 14.
You're on the bandstand with major league, mature jazz musicians, and not just exceptional jazz musicians,
right,
and having to hold your own, and an education that money can't buy, I guess, is
not at all. That was a school within itself, and I like I said earlier, I just appreciate them taking that time. I remember doing gigs if Mickey was out of town, and doing gigs with Shirley, and if she didn't like something, or she was she wanted you to play a certain way, they didn't hold back, which is for me. I like that. I think maybe back then I didn't really understand it, but now, like, looking back at it, I was like, man, this was so beneficial for my upbringing. Because they could have easily just said, "Oh, whatever, you'll hear it or you'll be okay." But they took the time to say, "Look, this is what we need when we're playing." So I really can't thank them enough for what they did. But like you were listening, but just to how they're playing, and how they're so laid back, and then and then you're wondering if they're going to make it. That was the whole feel of the sound of Philadelphia. I remember somebody explaining, I guess they were, it was an interview, and they were talking about my playing. They were saying, like, there's this it's a feeling of being laid back and then hurrying to the next beat. And that's always kind of the feel that I got when I would hear, different drummers from Philly play. That they really all had a very unique thing that was unique to the sound of Philadelphia. So for me, that's such a great example of that. That's why I had to include that in the list of my desert islands.
Well, now we're going to move to a couple of iconic recordings from the mid-1960s with two of the iconic modern drummers who have influenced, just about every beat. Well, anyway, not necessarily every beat, but any modern drummer playing jazz has assimilated Elvin Jones and Tony Williams.
Yep.
Next track is from A Love Supreme, John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, and it's the resolution track, the second movement of A Love Supreme. What to say about this track and what Elvin Jones does on it?
For me, this was just another turning point in my life when I heard this song. I had my father had a couple copies of the vinyl, and so I would go downstairs in the basement of our house and just kind of like be transported to a different world or something like that. And hearing Elvin for the first time playing the song, it just took me somewhere else. I was transported, and it just to hear his spirit come out on the instrument, and to see the connection between him and John was just, or just hear the connection, I say, was just very unique. And I would hear stories like later on about that connection. Like they, I guess they both served for a time in the Army, and there's a song I think Train wrote called "One Up, One Down," or "One Down and One Up," and that's actually like an Army call, but the response is being played on by Elvin on the drums. So when I would go back and listen to it, it was just so amazing to hear how connected they were. And so for me, like hearing Love Supreme Suite, but especially how Elvin accompanies John on the track Resolution, to me, it's just the epitome of how how a band is supposed to sound, but also how connection, how connected, we are in this music, and how important those connections are to play this music. So for me, I just I fell in love with this track, and of course the record in general. And this was actually one of the first records I bought with my own allowance money. And so I think also that's another reason why it's kind of near and dear to me, because it was like, I purchased this. I didn't have anybody buy it for me. It was one of my first that I bought with my own money, and I still cherish it. So I listen to it maybe. I do listen to it every year. And I always feel like I hear something different every time I hear it. So it never gets old to me. So that's why this is definitely one that I have to have in my playlist or my Desert Island CDs recordings.
Resolution from A Love Supreme. First few minutes of Resolution from A Love Supreme, and you hear the full flavor of that band in full gear.
Oh yeah,
Jones with.
Totally. I think also I had a newfound love for that record. Actually, even more recently, I after kind of the lockdown was kind of lifted, I started doing some recording with Ravi at that studio at Rudy Van Gelder's, where that record was recorded, and even the picture of the album is taken right outside on that stairwell of Rudy's place. So for me, it was just to kind of have that connection first playing with John and Alice's son, and then having that connection of like being in that place where that sanctuary in a way where that iconic record was recorded. It just gave me a whole newfound love for the recording itself. So
There were, of course, serious Philadelphia connections involved in the John Coltrane Quartet as well.
Of course.
Coltrane grew up in Philadelphia. Jimmy Garrison did, and McCoy Tyner.
McCoy Tyner, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wish if we had more time, we'd discuss the implications of those connections, but we don't. So let's move on to the next selection, which is Tony Williams with the Miles Davis Quintet. This recording from 1965, I think, of Nefertiti, or maybe it was 67. It was 67. I can't remember which. Wayne Shorter's tune, Nefertiti. Miles Davis Quintet, Miles, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. The impact of this selection on you and of Tony Williams playing on the way you conceptualize the drums.
I mean, Tony was just a freak of nature. I mean, he's maybe not even 20 years old on this recording, maybe 16, 17, maybe 17 or 18. But just the level of maturity that he displays especially on this particular track, because this track, the quintet, Miles and Wayne are just really just vamping the head. They don't really solo. It's kind of open for Tony. So what I love is just how Tony, he just builds a solo. There are all these peaks and valleys. He's taking you on a journey. He's taking, he's telling you a story. And it's very, he's not really giving you everything right away, which I love. And to me, it's like, I don't know how he did that. I mean, just to have that, I know, when I was his age, or when he was 19, or when I was 19 or 20, I was definitely trying to play everything I know on every solo I got. So just to hear how this level of maturity from such a young player is just amazing. And it just really, to me, it just changed the way, jazz drumming was thought about. There's a few pivotal recordings, but also pivotal drummers that really changed the shape of the way jazz drumming was thought to be played. Tony being one of them, Elvin, of course, another one, Max and Art Blakey, Philly Joe, Roy Haynes. So, to hear somebody so young, I think it, I can't imagine being alive during that time and hearing him live. I know that must have flipped a lot of people out. So, this is definitely one that I continue to go back to just to really listen to how mature he was at this very young age.
Nefertiti. Nefertiti, and you got a flavor of what Johnathan Blake was talking about, the epic waves and valleys and peaks and valleys that Tony Williams postulated throughout that. You were born in 1976, and during the 80s, as you know, you became more and more informed on the drums and are growing up. And in the early 90s, it's a very interesting time in the music. Mm-hmm. And now, you know, it's 30 years ago, it's history, but at the time, of course, it was very fresh. During the 80s, drummers like Jeff Watts, Ralph Peterson, Marvin Smitty Smith, Louis Nash were all emerging, and Kenny Washington, and a number of people, I don't want to go into lists, were establishing their own extensions and refinements of the vocabulary you've been playing right now. And as you're a teenager and, you know, getting into the fray, more people are coming up. So looking from your perspective now, as someone who experienced those developments in real time, but also can look back at as an educator and someone with an analytic mind, describe what happened to drumming in jazz during the 1980s and in some general way, if you can.
Well, I think, you know, there was kind of like a resurgence in a way of jazz with especially with jazz drumming. You know, I think, you know, this, you know, mid 60s, late 60s and 70s was dominated by, you know, the fusion era and rock era. And so, you know, the early 80s with the emergence of Wynton Marsalis and his brother Branford, there was a kind of a resurgence of drummers who of course had, you know, studied and learned the vocabulary of all the great drummers of the past, but actually kind of, you know, learned that, but kind of funneled it into their own interpretation of, and you know, a few of the drummers that did that, who you mentioned, were like Jeff Watts, who was an integral part of that classic Wynton quintet with Branford and Kenny Kirkland, Charles Fambro at times, Philip Bowler, I think, played a few, a young Charnette Moffett who was like 17. And they really, you know, in a way, kind of just developed this whole new style. It was kind of like almost an extension of what Miles was doing with his quintet in the 60s and you know, in 70s, and they've kind of just built on that foundation that was left for them. So as a young teen and also into my early 20s, being able to hear these gentlemen live, especially in the early 80s, like I got to know Wynton and Branford very early on because you know, they would be doing these tours with their bands opposite of like McCoy Tyner's band. I think at the time, maybe Wynton and Branford were playing with Art Blakey. So any chance that my dad, you know, was able to take us on the road, we were getting to see these young musicians play, or I was getting to see these young musicians play. And then, and so it was just really, you know, impactful, even, you know, probably even before I started touching the drum. But to see these great musicians who weren't, you know, there may be a generation before me, but just, you know, they're close enough in age where it was like, man, this is really amazing. One of the drummers, especially that I kind of got close with in the mid 90s was Brian Blade, who first was working, I think, with Kenny Garrett but in turn, like, started playing with the who's who of jazz and rock. He played and folk. He played a lot with Joni Mitchell, Emmylou Harris, you know, like all these people. So we kind of befriended each other fairly quickly, and one of my favorite records is a record that he's on It's by Kenny Garrett, called Triology, and hearing him play that, play on that record. It's just a trio record, but he and Kiyoshi Kitagawa. I think there's a couple tracks with Shawnette Moffett on bass too. But for me, that was like a very pivotal record for me. I remember seeing that group come to Philly and seeing them live, and I was just flipping out, to hear this guy who was not too much older than me. I think we're like 4 or 5 years apart, and I was blown away. So yeah.
You've been playing with Kiyoshi Kitagawa and Kenny Barron's group for a number of years now as well. So there's an added resonance to this.
Yeah. We've been playing a lot together, and he's just he's been an amazing friend and mentor in a way for a very long time. So it's always a pleasure getting to share the bandstand with him. We're going to be doing some playing or a concert, I think, in November with. He's subbing for Jay Anderson in the Maria Schneider Orchestra, so I'm really looking forward to playing with him in that band, because I don't think I've ever heard him play in that band before, so I'm looking forward to it. So,
Delfeo's Dilemma by Wynton Marsalis, the Kenny Garrett, Kiyoshi Kitagawa, and Brian Blake from the Triology recording from 1995. Very intense track.
Yeah.
Kenny Garrett, Kiyoshi Kitagawa, and Brian Blake. Johnathan, you yourself on 2 of your Reader albums have recorded in a pianoless. One was 2 saxophones and bass and drums, and that was on Crisscross. And then the one that you did for artists for Jimmy Katz's with Jimmy Katz Giant Steps label was you in trio with Chris Potter and Linda O. How do you adjust? Do you play differently in that format? Is it a different dynamic than playing in a more with more instruments, with more voices?
Yeah, I think for me, there's definitely a lot more space available when there's no chordal instrument. So I tend to feel like there's a little bit more freedom that I feel that I have when I'm playing in those situations. And and just playing like with people, like you mentioned the quartet record with Mark and Chris Potter, Mark Turner and Chris Potter, Ben Street. It was it's very unique because they both have very strong harmonic sense. So to give them that freedom to kind of play around with the harmony, it's really it's really great. I think I do take the stance where I try not to overplay and fill up that space and just really try to be in tune with what's going on around me. The trio record with Linda and Chris especially was very fun, but it's for me it's kind of a challenge too, because it's easy to want to fill up all that space that's available to you, but to kind of kind of take a note from Tony Williams, like really like kind of trying to tell the story is where I try to go, is what I try to go for when playing in those settings. So really trying to build that kind of that tension and the release, so to speak. So but I do really enjoy playing in those kind of chordless trio settings. I love it.
Coming up next is a track from Wynton Marsalis's very influential 1985 recording, Black Codes from the Underground, by the quintet that he had in the first half of the 80s, himself and Branford Marsalis on trumpet and saxophone, Kenny Kirkland piano, Charnette Moffett is the bassist, and Jeff Watts on drums. And this is, Wynton wrote this, right? It's his dedication to Jeff Watts, called Chambers of Tane, for Jeff Watts' nickname. A few words about this track, the impact of this recording upon you, if it was, if it had a big impact on you.
It definitely had a big impact, especially later. Why? Because for me, it was just like the epitome of how creating a band sound. That band, like you said, had been playing since maybe like 82, 83 area. So to hear the growth, like to hear them on their first, his Wynton's first self-titled album, Wynton Marsalis, to where they were at that point, it was just really, it was really a factor of them playing so much together, but really building something together as a band. And I think, when they started incorporating more of their own original compositions, their style of writing actually changed and grew too. And it was just amazing. So for me, like, while I love those, records like the self-titled, Think of One, Hot House Flower, it was something very special about the way they approached playing on this record that was very different from the other few records that I had heard early on. And actually, for me, it's like, this is where I really started to hear how Tane came into his own and really started to develop his own sound. Like, if you hear, I have a bunch of, like, I guess they're bootlegs, okay. But I have a lot of recordings of that band live, like from the 80s, or early 80s, like 83, 82, 83. And videos, there's video footage. But to see how he's playing and hear how he's playing then, he's really, you can really hear the influence of Tony Williams, and he's also like on the video, some of the videos he's playing like his hi-hat on all fours like Tony would do. So, but to hear how he approached that, and then when he grew into it, this recording was like very pivotal about how his style started to change and how he started to become into his own kind of his own voice, so to speak, in the music. So he's definitely been a big influence on me, still is. He's an amazing composer. I've known him practically all my life. I think I first met him when I was 3 or 4 years old. So he's also another extended family member, and he's watched me and helped me grow as a musician, as a drummer. So I give my hats off to him. I love this guy to death, and this is definitely one of my desert island. Like, I have to have this record with me if I'm on a deserted island.
Or even a populated one, hopefully.
Yeah, that's true too.
Chambers of Tane.
Chambers of Tane.
Yes, it seems like a shame to be fading out of all of these.
I
But
know.
on the other hand, anybody with an internet connection will have the playlist, and you can listen on your own to Chambers of Ten and these other great tracks that Johnathan Blake has been selecting for us on Desert Island Discs. Next selection features another very influential drummer of that period who made his mark with several bands, not least the Harrison Blanchard quintet. He and Carl Allen developed a certain way of extrapolating the New Orleans second line beat and funk rhythms and straight ahead swing into a very influential rhythm. Well, you describe it. I'm telling a drummer what a drummer did, but you can say it better than I, Jonathan.
No, you nailed it. I mean, they were so. I guess they were just so. They were such studied musicians. Like they just studied the whole history, the whole gambit of the drums. So they engrossed themselves in the New Orleans style of New Orleans style of street beat playing, but also especially this drummer who we're speaking of, Ralph Peterson. He was a pupil of Art Blakey, and the way he led bands, the way he fired up the band. Ralph was like a complete student of Art Blakey. He was one of the few drummers that actually got to play with Art Blakey at the Mount Fuji Festival in Japan in the mid '80s. So he, for me, I actually had the honor and the privilege to study with Ralph. When he was living in Philadelphia, and he became another major influence for me because number one, we talked about earlier about like unique sounds and unique tunings on the instrument. He and Tate and Blade were, three of the ones that really had their own way of tuning the drums that really was unique and to their playing. Ralph was just a force. I mean, he just, he could like take over bands if he wanted to. Like he just had that type of power. But he was also very, he could also be very, very musical. And I learned so much from studying with him over the years. I learned, he was big on composition. He was a trumpet player, as well as a drummer. He played great piano. So I learned a lot from a compositional standpoint, also not just the drums. And I was always blown away by the way he led bands. He had a great quintet, like in the early 2000s with Eric Revis and Orrin Evans and Jeremy Pelt and Jimmy Green. But even earlier that, he had this great quintet with Jerry Allen, I think Essiett, maybe Philip Bowler, maybe played bass on some of those too. Steve Wilson and the young Terrence Blanchard. So I think the track that we're going to play is from a record called V. Is that right?
That's what we're good. That's what we've got queued up. Enemy Within.
Enemy Within, right? And he was such. I can't speak enough about him, but I think he was really the ones that got that. Ralph was really one of the drummers that really got me in tune with the sound that I was projecting out of the instrument, making sure every note or every hit count. So he was really big on like stick placement, where you're placing the stick on the cymbal. He wanted me to always be thinking about the clarity that I was getting out of the instrument. So I have to credit him to that, and that's, he was one of these teachers. Sometimes you have teachers who are great players, but are not great educators. He was one who could play anything, but also could explain to you to a T what he was doing. So he really influenced me also as an educator, and later on as I'm, when I teach my students. So that's one of the first things I teach them is about the clarity and making every note count, and he's responsible for that. So
okay, The Enemy Within. we had to fade out during Jerry Allen's solo,
no.
The Enemy Within.
It's like sacrilegious. But that fire that he's putting under the band is just like, it's like a steamroller or something coming through, and you got to sink or swim. And I remember talking to people that came out of the Art Blakey Messenger School, and they always talked about that same type of feeling. Like, it's like, man, Art would play something on the snare, and it was just like, you knew something was coming. So it was like either you sink or swim. So I always got that feeling with Ralph. He really knew how to lead and push the band at the same time, and make the soloists, think differently. He always presented these different ideas, and if the soloist is in tune with what's going on, he would catch on and make them play differently too.
But before we get to the next track, I just want to make a broader point that all the drummers we've been hearing in the last half hour, 45 minutes, well, really for most of this encounter, are fully trained musicians. They know harmony, they compose, they play other instruments, piano, other instruments. So I don't know if there's still a stereotype about the musicality of drummers, but if you're listening to this, to what Johnathan Blake is presenting out there, that you should know, and if you think that, you should no longer think so.
Yeah, please don't. That's definitely a misconception. I think drummers actually write some of the most creative and amazing music. Jeff Watts, Al Foster, Joe Chambers, Philly Joe. Of course, Ralph. These are all study musicians. I mean, Jeff Watts has perfect pitch, so he can sing you a middle C or sing you a C so it's just like these are complete musicians, across the board. And these are very special. The things that we're playing are just very special recordings for so many reasons, and they've had such an impact. Ralph was, he was a tough teacher, but he did it with love, but it was also like he could see the potential in me before I could even see it in myself. Like he knew how to get it out of you, whether it was like being a little more militant than maybe other, but it was just like, it was done because he cared so much about the music and he cared about the individuals. And, it's a shame that we lost him last year. But I went up to his when I went up to his wake, his memorial. Some of his students were there, and that was one of the things that the students were talking about. He's like, man, he knew how to get the best out of his students, and so when I studied with him in Philly, it was tough, but I knew he was doing it because he didn't want me to rest on my on the fact of who I was. He wanted me to really learn everything I could about this music. So he encouraged me to continue writing, learn more about the piano. So I'm really indebted to him. I miss him dearly, but he was just a complete musician. That's all I can say.
Next, and one of the penultimate tracks will be one from a live recording by Roy Hargrove, who emerged on the scene I guess musicians first knew about Roy around 1986, 1987. People started becoming aware of him nationally, but he emerged in New York in 1989, and you joined his band when?
I started playing with Roy, and I think the first time was like 95 or 96.
1996. Right around the time the Jazz Gallery was established.
Yeah. I was actually still in undergrad at William Patterson. He, if you knew Roy, he was always going out to jam sessions. If he was in town, he didn't really sleep. So, I would see him at Smalls, and we would just get on stage and just start playing, and to the wee hours in the morning. I would get there maybe like 9 o'clock, and when I would come out of the Smalls, the sun would be coming up, and I would have to get ready to go to class. So at one point he called me. I think I was living off campus, or he called me at my dorm, and he wanted me to come to the Jazz Gallery. This is before the Jazz Gallery even started having music. It was just kind of like his headquarters, so to speak, for his management company with Daryl Fitzgerald. So, you know, they basically just had a piano there, and I think I had to bring my drums. I don't even think they had drums there at that point. And I came there and rehearsed with him and kind of auditioned. And, you know, he's like, yo, man, I'm gonna call you for some stuff. And wound up playing with him. This was kind of like right in between a band that he had with Greg Hutchinson, Gerald Cannon, I think Mark Curry, and Ron Blake. So when I came to the audition, it was still Gerald Cannon and Ron and a young pianist named Alan J. Palmer. So I started playing with him a little bit off and on, and it was just an amazing experience. He was one of the last of those musicians who was kind of bridging that gap between the more modern style of playing and the, you know, the quote unquote, lack of a better word, old school style, you know, which to me doesn't make sense because, you know, the stuff that those heroes were playing is still so relevant to what we're doing now. So, but he was one of the ones that, you know, he was heavily into hip hop, which I'm a big fan of hip hop and heavily into. So it was, and he was, again, not that much older than me. He was about maybe 5 or 6 years older than me. And Hutch was even younger. I think Hutch was like, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years older than me or something like that. So to have that opportunity at a very early age in my life was just amazing. And I do remember when this record came out, it kind of again changed the way I thought about playing the instrument, and especially this track that we're going to hear, Gentle Wind.
And it's from the recording of Kindred Souls.
Kindred Souls. Yeah.
All right, let's get to it. Taste of Roy Hargrove with Greg Hutchinson behind him. Another track Johnathan had wanted to put on this, but we didn't have time for, was a duo between Greg Hutchinson and Joe Henderson on Take the A Train from Joe Henderson's Lush Life recording. Greg had an impact on a lot of drummers your age by coming up so young and playing at such a high level at such an early age.
Yeah, I mean, he's still my big brother. We talk quite a bit. He's in Rome now, but we get on Instagram and sometimes we'll do an Instagram live together. We were actually last year doing teaching together online to students and he's definitely been a big influence. I remember meeting him. I think I first met him in '93 or '94 at the IAJE convention in New York, and we just hit it off immediately. We were like fast friends. I think I was 17 or 18, and he was like maybe like 22 or 23, and we just remained friends. But he was just he is such an amazing drummer. He's another one that just he can play any style. It's like he speaks multiple languages. He's like trilingual, or whatever. He can play Afro-Cuban. He can play hip hop like the best of them. He can play of course straight ahead. So he always even without saying, but he always was kind of like another person that like encouraged me to just listen to all types of music. Don't get just stuck just playing or get stuck playing one style of music. He always was like, no, open your mind, widen your palette, listen to everything and try to imitate what you hear. So and he's the king of doing that. I love, I've heard him on recordings with Josh Redman, recordings with great hip hop artist Common. So, he has a wide range that that he can play in. He's well versed in the history of the style of drumming.
Well, you mentioned being a big hip hop fan and Roy Hargrove's involvement in collaborating with hip hop and R&B artists as the 1990s went on. And the next track is from a Tribe Called Quest, which was also reaching its efflorescence around the time you were 14, 15, 16 years old. Yeah. We'll be hearing something from the album, The Low End Theory. A few words about the track we're going to hear.
Well, this particular record in general, Low End Theory, is one of my favorite records because it's, I should preface it, I got to know Q-Tip from, he would come down weekly to the Time Cafe when I was playing with the Mingus Big Band. And he was just like, he's a big vinyl lover, so he was always checking out jazz records. And he used to come down and we would just hang. And then, eventually he was like, man, I really want to do, a group of like a live band thing, me rhyming over like live tracks and stuff like that. So I was like, man, I'm definitely down. But I really love this record because it's so jazz influenced, like he's, there's one track that has Ron Carter on it. So he was he's still heavily influenced by jazz music. I think there's a track on there, or maybe this was an earlier record where he sampled something from a musician that I had a chance to be in his group for many years, who unfortunately passed away recently, and that's Dr. Lonnie Smith. So he was always, checking out so many different types of music. And I remember like when I started playing with Tip, we'll go to his house and rehearse, and he had like, it was just wall to wall vinyl. He had over like 10,000 records. So he was just influenced by so much different types of music. So this particular track, Butter, I think it incorporates a line from Gary Bartz, a Gary Bartz record. I can't think of the record right now, but I remember when I first heard it, I flipped out. I was like, because I knew that record. I was like, yo, that's Gary Bartz. And I also knew Gary, and still know him because Gary and my father played together in one of McCoy Tyner's installments in the early 80s. So I'd known him from a little kid. So to actually hear a hip hop artist incorporate that in this track, it was just amazing to me. So this is the track Butter.
Senior year at Garvey High, where all the guys were corny, but the girls were mad fly. Lounging with the tipster, cooling with Shy, scoping out the honeys. They know who they are. I was the B-ball playing, fly rhyme saying, fly girl getting, but never was I sweating. Cause when it came to honeys, I would go on a stroke until I met my match. Her name was Flo. Yeah, I messed around with the one called Flo. All the troopers round the way used to call her a hoe. But deep down in my heart, I knew that Flo was good to go, cause I thought it was me, like Belle Biv DeVoe. But little did I know that she was playing with my mind. The only thing I've learned is good girls are hard to find. I feel like Heavy D, I need somebody for me, not someone whose mind is blank and trying to juice me for my banks. Swinging with my main man, Lucky, behind my back. What type of crap is that? Yo, how's about a smack? Word life, I can't front. Thought I was all that, but now it seems I've met my match. I was a stone cold lover. You couldn't tell me jack. Settling down with one girl, wasn't trying to hear that. I had Tanya, Tamika, Sharon, Karen, Tina, Stacy, Julie, Tracy. Used to love them, leave them, skeeze them, tease them, find them, lose them, also abuse them. My whole attitude was new day, next hunt. And believe it or not, they all got done. But here comes Flo with the crazy whip appeal, and I'm Ultraman like Alexander O'Neal. Is this really love? Then again, how would I know? After all this time, trying to be a super hoe. She finally played me, but yo, I'd find another, cause I've got the crazy game, and yo, I'm smooth like butter.
It's like butter. It's like butter, baby. 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 It's like butter. Like the butter, baby. Not no parquet, not no margarine, strictly butter. Strictly butter, baby.
I remember when girls were goody two-shoes, but now they turn to freaks all of a sudden.
We love you,
Ease off, ho. My name's Malik. Fight this, fight that. Where you going, where you at? These girls don't know me from Jack, yet I feel like the Mac. You didn't want me then, so yo, hun, don't want me now. Yeah, yeah. Take the towel. Wipe off your brow and take the...
The city winks a sleepless eye. Hear her voice shake my window, sweet seducing sighs. Get me out into the nighttime, for walls won't hold me tonight. If this town is just an apple, then let me take a bite. If they say why, tell them that it's human nature. Why, does it do it that way? If they say why, tell them that it's human nature. Why, does it do it that way? Reaching out, touch a stranger. Electric eyes are everywhere. See that girl, she knows I'm watching. She likes the way I stare. If they say why, tell them that it's human nature. Why, does it do it that way? If they say why, tell them that it's human nature. Why, does it do it that way? I like living this way. I like loving this way. That way. I don't want looking out across the
Jonathan. Michael Jackson.
Yeah. He was, as I mentioned, I came up in the 70s and 80s. So this record, especially Thriller, was so big in the early 80s. And, I remember Jerry Curl became really big, and I started like taking little pieces of felt and trying to put it down the middle of my face and trying to learn all the dance moves of Michael Jackson, Billie Jean, and, Beat It was so on heavy rotation. He was huge. I remember around this time too, my father took myself and my sister to the stadium in Philadelphia Michael was performing with his brothers on this tour called Victory. Victory Tour the album was called Victory. It was one of the last records he did with his brothers, and they came to Philly. And I remember my mom was like so nervous for my dad to take us to Philly to the stadium, and she was like, "It's going to be crazy. You're not going to be able to get tickets." And somebody was scalping tickets, and we got tickets to the show and got to see him perform live. And I'll never forget that. You know, it was just an amazing experience. So, you know, Michael, is being a great entertainer, great vocalist, a great musician. He was just he's another one that I loved his level of maturity when he sang or when he performed. You know, he always left you wanting more. You know what I mean? He took you on a journey with him. So this tune for me, Human Nature, is again one of these tunes that we didn't have a chance to listen to it, but it just grows into something. It's like it's again like seeing the unveiling of this huge masterpiece, and that song especially, always when I listen to it, always reverts me back to childhood, but also that that picture of like unveiling something for the first time. And I just love I love how he sings on it, and how he builds on it. It's just one of my favorite. I can't remember who. I know he did the lyrics, but I can't remember who wrote the music for that tune. I don't know if it was Rod Templeton or something like that, but or maybe even Quincy. But yeah, just one of my favorite tracks off that record.
Well, Johnathan, you've given us a very expansive palette of music, very far-reaching, many implications, and very comprehensive, like your own playing. And like the sound of your latest record, Homeward Bound, in which you really, I can hear now, having just listened to it before we started this conversation, I can hear how many of the flavors that you presented filter into and are refracted in your playing throughout it in a very organic, non-self-conscious way. It's a beautiful record on Blue Note.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk more, but we have a time parameter, and as it should be, it always leaves them wanting a little more. The last track Johnathan has selected is from recording by Mulgrew Miller in 1993, and very key figure in music in the 1980s and 90s. He played with the Jazz Messengers, who played with Mercer Ellington, who played with Woody Shaw, played with Tony Williams, for that matter. And his own bands included people like Kareem Riggins, who is a great straight-ahead drummer, but also a great hip-hop producer. Derek Hodge, great bass player, who also bridges these worlds, as do so many of the musicians who are your contemporaries, a little younger, a little older, really embrace all these different flavors of music and incorporate them into a broad palette. Anyway, I'm sorry to have gone off on a little tangent about Mulgrew Miller. Just a few words about his impact on you, about the tracks, and about the track we're going to hear before we call it a morning.
Okay. Well, Mulgrew, he was definitely such an influential musician. He's another one who had a very unique touch and a very unique sound on that instrument, which is not easy to do when you think of some of the heroes that come before him: McCoy Tyner, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, Herbie Hancock. These were all such influential players, but so to kind of take that and develop your own sound and style on the instrument is very unique. I always call him the gentle giant. He and my father worked extensively together. He played on my father's last record, which I'm a part of. And he was always just so complimentary, but also very just supportive. I remember when I was in school at William Patterson, he came and played on one of my juries. And he really was like, look, man, he said, you have a lot of natural and raw talent, but that's not going to really, that's not really going to keep you working in this business. And he really took the time to explain, like, look, man, you have to really be well versed in everything you do. There's going to be certain things that you don't want to do, but you just do it because it's going to, in the long run, it's going to make you a better musician. So he always stressed about me being a complete musician. So I really miss and love him. He was just a beautiful. He had such a kind heart, a big heart. He was just very generous with his time. I remember him and Ralph Peterson coming to Philly to play with my father, and Charles Vanbrugh was on that. And he was, I got there early, I think, and we just sat and talked for hours. And he would, it wasn't like, get away from me, kid, like I'm trying to relax. He was like, he welcomed questions that I had. And so he was like another musical uncle for me. This track, this record in general, for me, is like, I feel like this is one of the most perfect records out there, like if there's any such a thing. But like for me, from beginning to end, it's just like the perfect balance of creative performing, creative writing, and just band playing. Lewis Nash, Christian McBride, Joe Henderson on a few tracks, Dr. Eddie Henderson, Kenny Garrett, Steve Nelson. It doesn't sound like all stars coming together to play. It sounds like sounds like a band. And I always kind of gravitate to those type of records. I always want to look for records where it sounds like a band. And to me, this record definitely is the definition of a band sound.
Johnathan, thank you very much for this thoughtful and creative presentation on Desert Island Discs. Track is For Those Who Do, and the featured soloists on this, if I'm not mistaken, but I think I remember this, are Kenny Garrett, Steve Nelson, and Mulgrew Miller, and again, Lewis Nash and Christian McBride on bass and on drums and bass. And see you on the next installment of Desert Island Discs. To our audience at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, thanks to Peter Lynn and Janine Wieman for making it happen from Yardbird Enterprises.
Thank you.